Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations.
Today's episode is the epitome of real talk. We're joined by a parent who we'll refer to as Jane Doe. Jane, sadly, had to live through the experience of watching her son face prosecution for rape and kidnapping. And after a long trial, agonizing, her son was found not guilty by a jury after only 15 minutes of deliberation. And I'm sure those 15 minutes were the longest 15 minutes of her life. Jane has graciously agreed to talk to us today about her experience.
And we thank you, Jane, for coming today. And Kristina, we deal every day in our practice with not just students going through Title IX process, but sadly, we have had a lot of interplay between the Title IX process and the criminal justice system. And we privately have conversations. And this is the first time on our podcast where we've had a parent tell their story. So thank you for coming. And our first question would be, without revealing identities, because we want to be sensitive to your privacy and that of your child, but can you briefly describe, Jane, what the allegations were that were lodged against your son? Tell your story.
I'd be happy to, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's an honor to talk about this process because of what our family has been through. Shortly after he graduated high school, my son was accused of rape and kidnapping by a girl with whom he had a casual relationship. They had had an interaction at a party. And again, they were known to each other, but they had interacted at a party. And shortly after their interaction was over, she accused him of rape.
Oh my God.
And as I say, at that moment, the train left the station. And from there, she reported the incident to her parents, who then, of course, as any parent would do, took action, not knowing any facts, of course, but just what their daughter had told them. And they took action. She went through the process of going to the hospital and a number of events that occur when you do that, when you make an accusation. And from there forward, it just felt like a bomb dropped and there was no control over what was going to happen from there. And I interject that the truth from that moment forward did not seem to matter. And she went through these stages, and there were many interactions between the school and us as parents, the school and the girl, the accuser. The police, of course, became involved. And then, of course, the justice system does its thing in whatever way it does that. There began the odyssey of this accusation that then turned into a criminal charge, which then turned into an indictment, which then turned into not one, but two trials due to I can't think of the word right now, a mistrial. And then, of course, ultimately him being found
guilty.
Not guilty in very quick record time. In fact, they, as a jury, agreed within moments that, of course, he was not guilty and that, of course, would be the outcome. So we got through that. That took years.
Oh my! I think it's so important that our listeners hear your story, Jane, because Susan and I regularly speak across the country on issues that essentially at the heart of it, legal issues tied to hookup culture.
Right.
And, we say hookup culture without judgment, but we want students and families to understand. And we really encourage parents to speak with their children about, possible consequences for various decisions students make. I mean, Susan, we sadly have seen many cases not all that different from what Jane and her family had to go through.
I'm just thinking about yesterday, Kristina, when we had a student who was going through a hearing saying that the number one learning lesson is to be careful about casual sex, because when you hook up with someone you don't really know, you don't know what they're thinking and how they feel during the whole sexual experience. And intimacy and mixed with the casual nature of the hookup,
Mhm.
seeing them collide. Did you ever have a conversation about hookup culture?
No, actually, I didn't. And it isn't that I shouldn't have. It certainly would have made sense. This was a number of years ago. I think before hookup culture was more in our everyday vernacular.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
think also it's probably year after year and with the rise of social media, because correct me if I'm wrong, but when your family was going through this, social media and cell phones and texting weren't what it is now. And I think that hookup culture, cancel culture, all of
mhm.
those cultural phenomena that we experience day in and day out, it's a little different now than when your son went through this. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. It didn't have the fervor that it does now. It was just at the forefront. And there were the Duke lacrosse case
Oh,
had
huge
Oh,
matter. Yeah.
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 and there was a lot of questions. There were a lot of articles, a lot of, I think, unknowns about this process because it was a good number of years ago. And I think there's some more understanding of it. And also, as you mentioned, the cancel culture is much more extreme now. It felt very strange then to be just sort of Xing these children out of their lives. I mean, whether it was school or college or a team or any of those things, like we do that very quickly now, but not
It's
so much
interesting to
then.
hear you mention or make reference to the Duke lacrosse case, because I think that was a case not that long ago, but nevertheless one of those massive cases that really brought to the forefront the idea that false accusations happen.
It was the first, I think, that brought it into the public foray. But Jane, can you tell us what it was like as a parent watching your son go through this process, going through the criminal
Yeah.
justice system? How did it feel? What were you going through?
I so appreciate that question because I think we often don't stop to wonder what it is like for the family and the parents. It was and is the most agonizing thing I've ever experienced, mostly because watching my son go from a vibrant, functional, productive person who was at the forefront of his life. He had just graduated from high school, was off to the next phase, which was going to be college. And it just turned on a dime. And he, of course, plummeted. I mean, it was agonizing because at the moment at which this all happened, his life stopped. And all of a sudden, he became what I say is the property of the justice system. And you have very little freedom then. You can't, do anything other than they tell you can do.
Well, it's
And
like just at that moment he was launching into adulthood and starting his life, everything came crashing down, it sounds like.
Yeah,
And
it was absolutely.
right, and it defines you, and it's hard to get
Yes.
out from that.
Can
But
you tell us, I'm curious to hear, looking back, what was your experience like for yourself and your family in terms of relationships with other friends and family, people supporting you as you lived through the ordeal? Were people supportive, or did you feel like people were distancing themselves from your family, your son?
I love that question, Kristina, because I know myself when my family went through trauma, there were stages. There's the initial stage where people are very supportive, and then there are people who, as I say, get off the train, and then you go through different phases. Jane, can you relate to that?
Yes, very much. It was interesting to watch because we were in a school environment and I still had other children in that same school. Uh, and related schools, but my son was in the same school. And so it was very interesting to watch, most certainly the school administration not supportive in any way, shape, or form, which was really distressing and frightening at times, again, because I had another child in the school. And I was heartened by the actions of friends, not even my closest friends, because from them, of course, I would expect support and kindness and love, but people with whom I was a good acquaintance, let's say, and several of them who stepped up and almost literally walked with me every single step of the way, including every minute of the trials. And that to me was the most remarkable part of this. But then, of course, on the other side, people that I would have, hoped I could count on did not. They fell away because they were intimidated by society or by the school's behavior, or maybe other factors.
Did you feel, I'm curious to hear your observations, were your other children, do you think, did they experience fallout from it as well in terms of friends and peer relationships, or were they able to maintain some sense of normalcy in their life as this was unfolding?
Peer relationships, I would say, remained stable for the most part. I think it created a lot of fear among the student body as a whole, just that something like this could happen, that you don't know, you're sort of living life one way, and then somebody does something that doesn't seem like it has any merit. But then there's a lot of questions. Well, if it doesn't have merit, then why is all this happening? So there was a lot of fear sowed among the student body by the administration. And that deeply, deeply affected my son, who remained at the school. But I would say his peer group was supportive and helpful to the extent that they could be. I think there were also some parental limitations placed on those kids just because parents were also afraid.
Well, I want to circle back briefly to the both trials. And of course, you have to emphasize, while you were so integral, it really was your child that was the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
But as a minor, strategic decisions and calls need to be made by a parent, or as your child. I don't know if your child was a minor at the time.
He was not. No, he was not.
Oh,
No.
okay. Were there difficult decisions that you had to make, or did you leave it all up to your child?
Susan, are you talking legal decisions, or what type of decisions?
Well, I'm going to ask you, Jane, what decisions did you have to make?
Yeah.
If at all, or did you just defer to your legal team and the student?
Sure. Because I am definitely a mama bear, and I was going to protect my child and my other children at all costs. And so, of course, I was integrally involved in the process. I trusted our attorneys, which were not our first attorneys, but we finally found the ones that were definitely right for us. I trusted them, and I trust them to this day. Not that I need them, and I hope I don't, but I trust them with our lives. But the decision ultimately, as you guys both know, comes down to the person who is the defendant. They have to make the ultimate call about whether a plea is accepted, that sort of thing. And I'll tell you, the most frightening moment of my life was the beginning of the very first trial, before the mistrial, and I had no idea how the justice system worked, no idea at all.
You'd never really had contact with it before. So
not
how
at all.
could you? And you never,
No.
in your wildest dreams, would imagine that you'd be involved, much less your child, right?
Exactly right. Didn't know where the courthouse was, didn't know anything about it. And what happened is, again, I'm sure you both know very well, all too well, right in the beginning of the very first day, the prosecution comes in and tries to make a deal, which evidently happens all the time. I did not know that. And we were faced and then faced again the next day and the next day with, how about we give you this? How about he takes this plea? How about, we make this all go away and he just pleads to a felony. I don't even remember what the numbers are. And it was paralyzing, terrifying, because you are faced with a decision that feels like life or death. And we understood very well that if for some reason this trial did not go our way, there was a minimum mandatory sentence for rape and kidnapping.
25 years, Kristina? How long?
3
Well,
to 5.
yeah, I mean, it can get complicated under the laws in Ohio, but certainly the decision to go forward to trial by your son was
Yes.
a massive decision that would take a lot of thought and reflection and bravery as well, because the
Bravery.
penalties are so high. And if the jury doesn't see it the way you hope, it's, I can't imagine what it's like for a parent to have to sit and watch, because of course, as you point out, Jane, Susan and I see this regularly in our practice. Being a lawyer and going through it in our professional capacity is very different from the experience of parents and loved ones.
After the first mistrial, was an offer for a plea renewed?
No,
Wow.
I don't think so. I can't remember, to tell you the truth.
So did you have to go through an entire trial the second time?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Start to finish, to the right through the jury selection, everything. Oh, yeah. And it didn't occur, of course, for several months, because the first trial ended in that mistrial just a few days or maybe even 2 days after it began. And then I don't even really to this day understand how the justice system works in an intricate way. But then it was several months of living in purgatory until the next trial began. And it was him having, my son having to live every day as if everything is okay. And then at the same time preparing for the next trial.
Was there a college acceptance that had to be delayed?
Well, not delayed. He went, but they made the school was very accommodating and very understanding, and they figured out ways for him to miss weeks for the trial and even have time off for preparation and that sort of thing, and to do the work just, when he could. They were very accommodating. So that was very lucky. And he did end up graduating on time, which felt like a miracle in a lot of ways.
Wow. So Jane, your son, of course, was found not guilty. Thank goodness. But so often, no matter what the outcome is, criminal cases, they just take a toll on everyone involved, the defendant, the family. And we try to remind our clients that no matter what the circumstances, a criminal case, a campus Title IX case, even a regular student misconduct case, because Susan and I work in all those settings. What type of supports should, based on your experience, do you think parents really need to be mindful about providing for their child as their child goes through any type of process?
Mm-hmm. I very much appreciate that question. I have thoughts about it. As much as one might feel, and I did feel this way, that I could manage it all, my own intense, deep fear and stress, manage my other children, and certainly support my son, it's impossible to do it yourself. And so what I did was get him some outside support through the psychological community, get him a therapist with whom he could work. And I would offer a word of caution about that, only that the psychologist or whomever is the mental health practitioner needs to understand deeply and fully that this is a criminal matter, and may, that person, that practitioner may well end up in the middle of the case because, of course, the other side subpoenas everything. And so that is just a word of caution about how to work with your mental health practitioner.
That's great advice.
While supporting, because that was an interesting turn that it took, but it was good for him to have outside support, somebody And because you're so immersed in this process, your family is just sucked down a rabbit hole that is very hard to get out of and see the light of day. It's important to have that outside support. And then for me as well, and the rest of our family. My other kids were deeply, deeply impacted by this. And even today, many years later, my other kids will talk about what that was like for them, particularly my daughter, who's a bit of a chatty Cathy, and she will to this day talk about what it was like for her to be in school and trying to live as if every day was just a normal day. And it wasn't.
And how do you tell the kids when they wake up in the morning, just get out of bed, we got to eat breakfast, go to school, put one foot in front of the other? Because I can only imagine at a certain point, they just say, I can't handle this. I can't do it, Mom. How did you keep everyone going?
Lots of talking about it, even to the extent that my daughter would say, I can't talk about it anymore, Mom. I'm fine for now. Let's take it up later. Or inviting my children to just be open and honest about their feelings. But I have to say, I did have an emotional limit because I was so overwhelmed and terrified that I think my stress definitely inhibited their ability to function as well as they could have. My older
dominoes, you're the first domino.
Yes. And my son, who remained at the school, of course, because he was a senior, so he wasn't going to change schools, and he had a great support group there. But he had, as boys often do more than girls, had somatic symptoms that were very strong.
Headaches, stomach aches?
Terrible backache that did not leave for months, despite, treatment and trying to work it through and understanding that it was somatic. But it was really hard to watch because he was an athlete, and it's going to come out somewhere. And that's where it impacted him. So it's sort of another word of caution to be watchful about the impact of this on the other children, not only your child who's in harm's way, but the other children, and to watch for smaller, more subtle signs of impact on them. They might not voice it, but they might have a chronic stomach ache, headache, backache.
Grade slipping, friend change the friendship group. But, I want to switch gears because we always forget Mom. Mothers are always the last to get attention. So how did you heal? And what would you tell? Because, everything at the end of the day, no offense, dads, no offense at all. You guys, you're a rock too, but let's face it. Mom, you're numero uno. And if you fall, everything happens. So what did you do to keep yourself up, and how did you heal afterwards?
I relied heavily on my friends all the way through, and my family, of course, but all the way through from the beginning, really to this moment. I mean, really, I've had many hours and hours and hours of just conversation and sort of unloading, if you will, about the topic. I also connected accidentally at first and then purposely with other mothers and really parents who have been through this or were going through it at the same time. So I was accidentally connected at first with at least two other families. And through that, my being able to support them because I was a little bit ahead in the process was a wonderful feeling for me.
That it wasn't back, right?
You didn't feel alone.
And right. Just to be able, sometimes we get out of our own head.
Yes.
Helping others. And also, I just have to interject. I mean, you're talking to someone, Jane, who obviously works very closely in her practice with a female partner who supports me every day of my life, and my own circle of friends. Every woman needs a close community
of support
of good girlfriends. It can't be, I'm sure the hard part of saying it's always your spouse, the spouse is going through it too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly right.
Shout out to girlfriends, right?
Yes,
Right.
yes. And to those who had the good sense to say to these other families, gosh, you need support. And I just happen to know somebody who is some steps forward, or at this point, all the way forward in the process. It was wonderful to be connected, not just for them, but as you said, to give back and feel like, okay, the focus isn't just about us. There are lots of other terrible things happening, and I can help. And that was a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
So I think that it's so great to hear you talk about that, Jane, your ability to connect with others going through the process, because Susan and I, when we're working with families in various stages of crisis because of campus or legal proceedings, albeit criminal or civil, because let's face it, civil litigation takes a huge toll on parties and families as well. It's just essential that people find others, and when possible, we try to connect. In our experience, because as you know, we, in addition to doing criminal work, we file lawsuits on behalf of students, particularly in the Title IX landscape, when things don't quite turn out the way we believe they should. And in our lawsuits, we often find ourselves suing parties and individuals for defamation and other claims along those lines. And unfortunately, I think your family had the experience just when you thought the criminal chapter was closed and you're done with court, you found yourself back in court in the civil context. So based on that experience, what advice would you give to parents and families who are contemplating civil litigation?
And I just want to interject, you had a positive outcome, correct?
Yes, very much. And it was the civil portion of this story was facilitated by my son and me. We felt so. I did, honestly. I felt so strongly, and I had such clarity about his innocence and about the injustice in this process that I knew from the beginning that I was going to at least try to have a balance brought at the end of this nightmare. And so once the criminal portion concluded with his, being found not guilty, I got to work and I gathered the resources that I felt I needed. It was not easy, I'll tell you, to gather the resources in the legal community to take this case to civil trial, if possible. And so we filed a lawsuit of defamation and prosecutor, help me.
Prosecutorial or malicious prosecution.
Malicious prosecution, thank you. I filed that in a way back file cabinet in my brain. And so we filed that and we got very far, in fact, all the way to the end of the process, which we've been told many times is a miracle because that is not an easy process. And those are not easy charges or if you say charges, to claims to level and to be, I guess, triumphant in the end. But we were, because the merits of the case were seen by those who were examining it on the other side. And they, at the 11th hour, of course, came forward with a settlement offer.
Did that give you the closure?
It did in some ways. I think we had some sort of fantasy, as it were, that a civil trial would really get to tell the other side the real story, the lies that were perpetrated. But short of that, yes, it did bring closure. In the settlement portion, of course, it's just in a courtroom, I don't know, with the judge, and then it's done right there. But
I mean, we could talk to you forever and ever about this, and we're running out of time. So I just have one last question before Kristina concludes. If you had one quick piece of advice for parents, what would that be?
Find your strength from wherever you can get it. Rely on whomever you need but be careful, really examine where that support is coming from, and stay the course. Stay the course, because your child needs you, and not only at that moment, but for the rest of his or her life, as this impact, will take its toll. So find your strength and stay the course, and don't be afraid. It is a terrifying situation, and I understand that, and you can indulge that, but you got to stay strong, because the outcome could be terrifying, and you need to have perspective and stay strong.
Jane, thanks for joining us today. Really, really
my gosh.
appreciate you opening up and speaking to us and our listeners about some very personal and painful things that your family's gone through. But you're here now. You made it through, and I think that's really important. To our listeners, thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.